Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us this Thursday night, just to revel in the life and work of the iconic artist Tom of Finland. My name is Julie Niemi, the communications manager here at David Kordansky Gallery, New York City, and I'll be moderating this amazing panel tonight with our lovely guests. I'm just going to give a little bit of context here. So this event was organized to celebrate the exhibition on view around us, Tom of Finland, Highway Patrol, Greasy Ride, and other selected works. This presentation is our fourth exhibition of works by Tom of Finland since the gallery began working with the foundation over 7 years ago when David was reintroduced to Tom's work by the artist Richard Hawkins. For us, it was important to support the Tom of Finland Foundation for their rigorous and dedicated efforts toward protecting, preserving, and promoting the erotic arts for over 3.5 decades. So, this presentation opening here tonight is a rather important one for us. For one, it includes 2 complete series from Tom's Kake graphic novels, Highway Patrol and Greasy Ride, which is significant to us and to, I think, everyone on this panel, as it allows us to view the entire panels from a story, seeing the subtleties, tension, pleasure, and joy expressed in Tom's beautifully erotic drawings. Another reason this show is significant is that these panels have not been shown in nearly 40 years and are positioned alongside Tom's preparatory sketches and reference collages, which are right behind us, allowing us to see into his entire process from start to finish, and also see Tom's intricate attention to detail and pleasure when rendering these works. Of course, we invite you to stay long after for the opening celebration that starts at 6:30, really to examine this work up close, especially with the graphite drawings, and just take your time and really take it in. We also have copies of Threesome, which is right here on the table. It is our new major catalog that documents 3 exhibitions held at David Kordansky Gallery between 2015 and 2021. And I also want to acknowledge this book contains an incredible essay by our very own panelist, Brontez Purnell, right here. It's really good. So also, take a moment, see the front desk, get yourself a copy, take it home, and spend some time with it. So, tonight, we've brought together these 4 panelists to speak to the various tenets of Tom's life, work, and cultural impact. First off, we've got Durk Dehner over here, co-founder of Tom of Finland Foundation. Durk needs no introduction for, I think, a lot of folks in the room, but for a brief one here, Durk. Durk is the co-founder of Tom of Finland Foundation and has long been involved in Tom's life as a confidant, as a partner, a friend, an ally to the community. It's a really great honor to share the stage with you here tonight, Durk. I'm getting very emotional even saying that. Today you continue to spearhead and uphold Tom's incredible legacy, and you really touch on Tom's lasting influence across society and generations of gay communities. So thank you so much for being here, Durk, really. Artist and writer Nayland Blake, right here, so good. Who authored one, artist and writer, has an incredible practice, but also authored one of the earliest pieces of scholarship on Tom in Out magazine, and has been a constant ally, supporter, and friend of the foundation over the decades, really. And tonight, we're going to hear a little bit about Tom's impact on punk culture and aesthetics, as well as on Nayland's own writing and artistic practices. Also, we've got Brontez Purnell, a former artist in residence at the Tom House. Woo! Also a writer and artist. You have an incredible body of work, and we're really excited to have you here as well. And lastly, we've got Claire Gilman, Chief Curator at the Drawing Center here in New York, who will provide further formal context to Tom's drawings and their relevance to 20th century art history. So let's give one more warm welcome to our panelists here tonight. All right, so I'm gonna let these folks do a lot of the talking and steer it where it needs to be steered, but I don't know if I'm gonna have to do a ton of that because we're a friendly group and I feel like there's a lot of history here tonight. But I think one of the things that is important to really kick off with, just because of the personal nature and vision of Tom, you can see in these drawings in this room just a tenderness, an attention to detail, an eroticism that honestly extends into the world of nature, into the world of fantasy, into the world of pleasure, and it's full of pleasure. I mean, every one of these drawings is just a very tender moment. And I think to kick things off, because of how personal they are, I think it's important to hear a little bit about really how each of you came to Tom's drawings and really how they've touched you personally over the years. Durk, I naturally want to start with you and just hear a little bit about that.
Well, I did not grow up with his work. I was 26 when I first saw a drawing of his on a barroom wall here in New York City. That was called The Spike, and something just pulled me towards this drawing, and it was advertising a motorcycle run, and there was no more little numbers at the bottom, so I thought, well, I'll take it. And I took it, not knowing who drew it, and it just so happened the next day I met another erotic artist, and his name was Etienne, and I pulled it out and showed it to him, and I says, do you know who this is? And he went, oh yeah, that's Tom of Finland. And he says, do you like it? And I said, yeah, I do, but the thing is that it sort of had this emotional pull that I've never experienced before. And so he says, well, I have his address if you want to write him. And so I wrote him a letter, and I told him about what happened to me, and he wrote back. And so we had this connection, very loose. We wrote a couple of times in the next year, and then I moved to the West Coast. I'd lived there before, to LA, and he wrote and told me that he was coming to America, his first trip. And I said, well, please let me host you. And so he did, he accepted that. And so during that time that he was in LA and we were in San Francisco also, I got to see how much love and dedication and homage that so many guys. We had one experience today where someone from the audience actually communicated how important he was in their development, and that was the first time he got to see something sex positive about who he was. And this happened time and time again in every public appearance, and so I realized I've got to be aligned with this man and do what I can to support him. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I feel like I'm obviously probably the newest, I came to know Tom more recently than the rest of you. It's hard for me to say, I guess, when I first was aware of Tom's work, but somewhere along the way, I just was very much aware of Tom's work, and sort of just naturally understood that in the world of erotic drawing, he was, without parallel. He was peerless. And I think I did, maybe the first time I saw a sort of significant body of his work was the Artist Space exhibition, which was, I can't recall the date of that, but it's about 10 years ago, I think, or something like that.
Hopefully not that long.
Oh, maybe, okay. But several, 2015,
yes.
2015, so going on 8 years ago. So a while ago now. And so that was, an opportunity for me to really, look at his work up close and sort of come to, understand for myself, well, what was it about his work that made him peerless in this way? And I think it's not only only obviously the expert quality of his draftsmanship, which is certainly, very crucial and unparalleled, and the attention he gives to every detail in his work, but it is really the joy, the sort of transcendent joy that you feel when you're looking at this work. So, the erotic charge is there, but it's immediately, but it's inseparable from the spirit of joy and love and pleasure, in a transcendent sense, that these people are having a sort of transcendent time. And that translates, I think, beyond the specific narrative. And so that's, I think, where I think about the power of drawing generally. And it's drawing at the highest level because it has that, it creates that transcendent experience for the viewer. Should I move this? Oh.
Maybe we'll just
Okay.
do that. And
We're gonna get tilted.
generally I can project. Can people hear me? Yeah, great. Thanks. So I have to say that probably my first time seeing any of Tom's work was at a porn shop on Christopher and Hudson. Do you remember that one? And I guess it was because they were kind of publishing their own editions at a certain point. They were pirating, but out of the pirated editions, they sort of had like the highest quality of that. And so I was really like blown away. And also because I was like a little bit of like a history nerd even then, I was like digging around in places like Gay Treasures and finding copies of Physique Pictorial and sort of looking back through that stuff. So I was really interested in it, but there was like zero information about his biography at all at that point. In any of those editions, you had no idea who he was. It was just like a state of mind more than anything else. And then I guess the biggest turning point for me was that like better editions started to come out, I think. And I was contacted by Durk, and I can't remember how I know what the connection was on my end. There was a gay, and at that point, as we called it, gay and lesbian journal called Outlook that I knew one of the editors of, because they used to be an editor on Socialist Review, and they were the downstairs neighbors of my boyfriend at the time. And so they talked to me about doing a piece on Tom of Finland. And as part of that, it was possible to interview Tom. And so that was where we got to know each other. And that was a really remarkable experience, being able to interview Tom over the phone, to actually be able to do some research and start to put together what the actual story of the work was, and to be able to kind of write about it as art, as doing the important thing that I think art does, which is that it calls communities into being. And I'll go off about this later on, but there's, I think that it's a little bit like, it would have been enough if Tom had been like a great draftsman. It would have been enough if Tom had been like really kinky. It would have been enough if Tom had been, but the fact that it was like all of these things, and that what we think of as the Tom of Finland universe in part was made collaboratively internationally by a group of people who were trading ideas about what they thought was hot, what outfit they thought was hot, all of that stuff back and forth. And that Tom was able to reflect that and channel that and expand on that is a really remarkable story about what the power of art is. And so I feel like really privileged to be able to be part of that in some goofy way, because it has upped my own ambitions for what I could potentially do with my work. And, I've always got a lot to say, so I'll say more later on, but I'll pass the mic now. Oh, I do want to say one more thing, which is that all of us take a second. We would not be here. We wouldn't know any of this shit if not for Durk. Like, in a totally real sense, it is the actions of this man that allow us to be here tonight.
Fuck yeah. I don't ever remember there not being Tom of Finland drawings. It's like one of those things where it's like so fucking elemental, like it was just always there, right? But I can clock when I first started paying attention. I had moved to the Bay Area, and my friend worked at this place called Last Gasp. And I used to sell this zine called Fag School. I did this zine when I was like a teenager. Called Fag School, but they
Last week.
Yeah, totally. So they had this Tom of Finland anthology, and I remember always seeing like the muscle dude pictures, but in the anthology it gave the timeline of his drawings from in the 40s when he would draw kind of like poofters or whatever, like I think it's called the Queen and Trade years. And I just remember like these like really queeny guys and those like hairdos and like dressed up very dandy, like kind of slow dancing with sailors. Cause I always thought it was just like, like cop rape. I didn't know it was like, I didn't know that there was other like sweeter tones to it that was moving into like, the clone years and so on and so on. I would be like so fucking obsessed with that. I remember being so obsessed with the Queen and Trade years because that was like, I don't know, that was my favorite thing to watch. And then slowly but surely, I have no clue how I got into the artist in residency program. I feel like one day someone was like, hey, do you want to come live at the Tom of Finland house for a couple months and make some shit? And I was just like, yeah, I love free rent. But I came there and I did the dance performance there, and then I wrote like the first couple of chapters of my sci-fi book there that just got bought by FSG, and I remember it just being a totally loving and amazing place. It was super fucking fun, and it reminded me of all the punk houses I lived in Northern California, but in LA. So it felt like family.
Yeah. So there's a few different threads here that are sort of coming out, which includes, I think, freedom of sexuality, freedom to be oneself in the world. There's also, the more sort of formal aspect of Tom's drawings, and there's also a circulation sort of the punk culture, the zines, the materials that we've all somehow been privileged to have them in our lives. But it took a lot to get there. Durk, I want to kind of ask you a question and expand that out a bit more. One of the things that we kicked off kind of the staff walkthrough today was freedom of one's sexuality and how that's really in Tom's work. And you also showed us the cockwing button that you have on, which is an amazing, amazing emblem. Yeah, and it's just one of the things that I think is important to really talk about is how Tom specifically gave a lot of people freedom to be who they want to be. And I really want you to sort of talk a little bit about the cultural implications of Tom's work in kind of a larger scope and what has been overlooked in his legacy at this point. And I also would like to open that up to everyone and sort of touch on how you sort of see that coming through in the work as well.
Well, at the time that he started, in the 40s and into the early 50s, he had the realization that gay boys were not being given the same sort of iconology as heterosexual boys, and that fathers were somehow neglecting their gay sons. And what he did was he just supplied other imagery and other kinds of role models that were not being given to homosexuals. So, I mean, I grew up in Canada. I didn't know about Tom, and I got to watch Liberace, and I and my parents were watching Liberace, and I went, how can my father be sitting there watching him? And so I did not want to become Liberace, but anyways, that was it. There wasn't any others. And what Tom was doing while I was growing was creating other alternatives. So it's not that the supermasculinity was the answer, but it was something that wasn't given. And so he proliferated that, and in a form of making sure that his men were homosexuals. And how he did that was making sure that they were kissing or having sex, and that there was a clear message there, and that they were happy, and that they were, in fact, well-adjusted, and they were not sick. And so that was his message, and that really proliferated out. I've had curators from LACMA. He was included in an exhibition called Made in California in 2000, and they said to me, we know that Tom didn't live in LA, but he actually did artwork for a company that was in LA, and he was really one of the main sources of creating the California gym culture. Because what happened is that young developing homosexuals, they saw his drawings and they wanted to be like that. And so they had to open up gyms and everything for the vast number of people who wanted to be part of that. And then it passed on to heterosexuals. And so then, because before that, there was one Jack LaLanne in LA, and there was one, and there was Gold's Gym, and that was it. And so he just opened that door, and that door opened and spread across the country, and then into Europe, and so all of these other things blossomed out of it. And so they wanted his work in that exhibition and got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of going off that topic for a second, but I'll return to that. But I think it's such an amazing, I mean, sort of going back to what Nayland said, it's so amazing to see, work that envisions something and then actually works to bring that thing about. It's sort of, I mean, that is that's the highest form of art. That's what I suppose art, kind of aspires to in a certain sense, but doesn't achieve that frequently. So that was something that Tom's work really concretely, literally achieved, that he created this utopia in his imagery, and then he actually kind of helped to make that a reality. But I guess the other thing about, maybe that I would add about how his works express ideas of freedom is also in the way he sort of subverts power dynamics or power structures. So, frequently there are people in positions of power, such as the cops that you were speaking about, or other kinds of officers. But what might begin as a situation in which the position, the person in that role seems to be the person with power, in the dominant position, in that image, quickly over the course of the narrative changes and subverts so that the other person or people who are in this situation are given the opportunity to be the people in, the dominant people in that situation. So he's very consciously trying to play with and reference and also subvert traditional power dynamics.
Mm-hmm. First power.
Yeah, I mean, Julie, you were talking about like freedom of sexuality, and I think one of the freedoms in there is the freedom to be funny. Like a thing that people do not talk about enough is that these are funny drawings, and like people are smiling in them, and there are like jokes in them. Like I was sort of looking at this, and there's like, a great, like one of the things that's happening in this sequence of drawings is Tom going like, okay, how do I draw three ways where one person is handcuffed to another person? Like how do I keep changing positions? But these, and there's this sort of hilarious drawing where like, you know, Kak is about to like fuck one guy, but he's got like his hands crossed behind his back because one is like, you know, handcuffed and he's trying to hold the balls and dick of this other guy. You know, which is like a hilarious pose. You know, it's a very erotic pose, and the sort of the seriousness. And I guess this comes to my other point. Like when I was approached about doing this article, in a way I was a little dubious because I was not a fan. I was fascinated by the drawings, but I was like, these are weird neoclassical. What's the racial dynamic in here? I'm not a fan of cops. Like all of this stuff. And so the process of working on this interview forced me to really look at what's going on in them. And when you really look at the drawings, there is verse power in them. Everybody always flips. It's like nobody stays atop forever.
Like literally flips. Like
Yeah.
That's what's so literally flips.
And so it's
around.
like, you know, the guys who I was encountering in the San Francisco leather scene who were like stone tops and I never bought them because, you know, that would be whatever. It's like, oh, well, I have some evidence that like that may not be such a good idea for you, you know? And it is their level of good humor and jovialness that sets them apart from 99% of the other like erotic art that you might encounter.
Also, too, when I was encountering this in my 20s, of course, I was hanging out with like the SF crowd. They were just like, oh, this is so fascist, this is so fucked up, this is so whatever. But having the reference of the book and seeing the people that he based the drawings on, they were pretty normal dudes. And I also was someone who read comic books. You know, I read comic books and I understood theater and I understood theatricality, right? In my head, I guess I could never separate it. I always would just see Wolverine and Cyclops fucking. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is what this was supposed to look like. Obviously, too, at the time, I was totally fucking a cop, and it was nothing like that. It was like... Because it's like, and also like when you're watching these like poses, it's like, yeah, like you totally need 42 inches of dick to make any of these positions work. Otherwise, you're just kind of like, oh, you guys, let's just be friends. So there was kind of like, there is just this broad sense of camp to it that you just can't help but like, you just can't help but totally enjoy, or like this kind of balloon sense of masculinity that I think is totally a part of. And also, too, at the time, we were the boys that were pre-prep. Mm. So there was the other layered message of we had only grown up with condom porn, right? And then by the time this rolls around, you see all these motherfucking dudes barebacking. And also, at the time, I was a misled youth. I was fucking all the Treasure Island media boys. And so I was kind of like, finally, someone here to represent my struggle as someone with a latex allergy.
But also, like from the comic point of view, he's an incredible inker.
Yeah.
Like those of you who know how comics are made, usually you'll have somebody who's like a really good penciler. They may not be a good inker. Right? But it's like he could do both of them. Mm-hmm. Like, that's really astonishing.
Them boots are fucking shiny.
Yeah,
very shiny.
I was going to also just say, I think it also gets back to the fact, again, drawing and the essence of drawing and the fact that these are drawings versus photographs, although I know that Tom did make photographs. They were more for study. They weren't, he wasn't conceiving them as the finished works. And I think the important thing is that the kind of absurdity of a lot of this, like what you're saying, these are things that I'm thinking, I mean, I haven't engaged in these, but I'm assuming would be kind of difficult to replicate all of these in real life, right? So there is an element of fantasy to them. Obviously, there's an element of exaggeration, which, separates them from photography. Right. You're not, exactly.
This many verse dudes in one scene. There is usually a top if you're lucky.
Precisely. And that's what, drawing is is a way of imagining something, right, that might not be otherwise, that one might not find otherwise. That's, in a way, its intentions are different than photography, which is, certainly you can subvert the intentions of photography as well, but maybe at its root, photography, one might say, is a way of recreating the world, right?
Yes.
As is, and drawing is not that. Drawing, or there is an aspect, or a very important aspect of the history of drawing, which is about creating something that cannot be, and he is very much invested in that history. So he's a drawer, both literally and conceptually, in a sense, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. And you can see in these him working out the fantasies too, especially in the preparatory drawings in the back, like the gestures and just how it's coming into being, like the tenderness, the care, and also just the utter fantasy in it. I do want to talk about one thing that came up, I think, is like the large question is circulation. And the other part of that too is just how these, to me, and I've talked to David, or I've heard David and also talked to David about this, is just how these are in a lot of ways kind of early beginnings of punk zines. In their aesthetics, in their circulation, in the attitude, in the subversiveness of, authority figure, and the submissiveness sometimes too. So I'd be curious to hear just a little bit about how these were circulated, and I know that there's also a bootleg history to them as well. So there's a two-part question: how these came into being and into the hands of many people, and then also what was Tom's reaction in a lot of ways to their bootlegged qualities. Durk, I'll let you sort of start.
Well, actually in London, bootleg works were being passed around the punk scene, the Sex Pistols, and he was, because he was an outsider, and they didn't really care about whether they were homosexual or not. It was that he was so overt in his drawings. And he was doing different drawings for Europe than he was for America, because America had such strict rules. We have works from 1958 that is full-blown, like a major orgy going on. And so it wasn't until he came to America in 1977 and we visited adult bookstores that he got so angry about the reproduction quality of the work, much more than him not getting any compensation. And it was very ironic that we were referred to a printer in the Valley where the porn capital is, and we sat in front of him, and he was smoking a cigar, was sort of overweight, he had a tie on and was loosened down, and he was on the phone. And when he got off the phone, he reached over and said, "I want to shake your hand. I made so much money off of you that I put my son through college." And Tom was speechless. And so we left that day using him as a printer, and I promised Tom that he would be buying from us in the next couple of years, soon as we got established as a printing publishing house. And he bought from us, because no one would buy the poor quality from that on. Then on.
I think that, to toot my own horn a little bit here, one of the things, quite a while ago, I curated a show called In a Different Light, that was looking at the influence of queer artists and queer culture on contemporary art. And one of the things that we did in that is that we used a lot of popular media. And by popular, I mean like popular within various scenes. So we had a whole section of queer zines. We looked at things like Physique Pictorial, and we also looked at the lesbian music scene as examples that sort of predated punk of underground, subcultural media, self-publishing media empowerment. And I think one of the things that Durk is alluding to here is that it was incredibly difficult to get anybody who would actually run this work off of a press. And one of the reasons why things were circulating in the poor quality that they were is that people might in the 70s have access to a Xerox machine, but they did not have access to an offset printing machine, right? They didn't have access to, they could get busted for sending something through the mail. You couldn't display it openly in a store. So all of that stuff, that sense of there really being an underground, and so when you encountered this stuff, you cherished it in a way that you do not cherish the media that you encounter now. Because it's like now we turn on the tap and media pours out of our phones and out of our computers and out of our screens to the extent that we want it to stop. But there's something similarly utopian about the publishing and circulation methods that people were using at the time to find each other. Like, that Physique Pictorial had like ads for their photo sets and their drawing sets from Tom that you could order individually. They also had personal ads. It was also a way for people to literally hook up. And I think that linking of sexual fulfillment, desire, pleasure, and these images had a really different kind of potency there. That is a little bit hard to kind of keep in mind at the present moment.
I remember when I did the residency, my art wife, who I call her, Sophia, she bought me this bootleg Tom of Finland rag from it was probably from around the late 50s. And I actually have one of those bootleg ones. She bought it at some place for a lot of money. But it shows the Tom of Finland drawings, but at the back of it, it was all this warnings of it as cautionary tale behavior and used as a rag to talk about how chlamydia and gonorrhea is spread. So that was one of the methods of how they got the bootlegs through.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
So interesting.
Yeah, that it was for educational purposes.
That it was for educational purposes, totally.
Fascinating. I'm not on this particular topic.
Oh, it's okay.
On every topic.
No, yeah, totally. Well,
Claire promised that she was going to break out her enormous collection of bootleg pornography.
No, but I mean, this is a great panel because there are a lot of voices. I mean, one of the things, too, I also want to hear about in a minute is just the Tom of Finland residency itself, what the space is like, what that sort of does for artists and what they're making. So Brontez, maybe you can speak to that for a minute of just what was the space itself and what did that sort of do to generate your own work? And how did Tom's drawing sort of, create that space?
Well, at the time, I was also doing a residency at the Peter Performance Space. And then the Tom residency was happening also, and it was more like a stand space. And I, at the time, was working with a lot of us Bay Area artists are so fucking weird. We're just yeah, we're witches. And so at the time, the performance language was seance that we would use. Because, the word dedication just means something is dead, where seance invokes the idea that something is living. And so for my public engagement night, I remember I said to y'all, I was just yeah, I want to do a seance. And they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? They're like, are you going to raise the ghost of Tom? I'm like, no, wait, hold on. No, I mean a fake seance, or but it was really beautiful. The house sits on top of a hill. There's this gorgeous shrub bush there. And you can tell that there's a really beautiful history. Tom's room is at the top of the house. I think last time I got to sleep in the room, I kept waiting for the ghost to molest me. But there was something to be said for being too willing. But it was just a really nice, cool collective house. There were two other artists there at the time, and so what I did was I did an immersive theater performance that moved throughout the house, that moved from the front yard to the backyard, had 5 other dancers and performers and just poetry. There's an 8mm film of the night. If anybody wants a link to it, I'll give it to you. And FX came and was shot part of it. So they have all the intense footage locked away in some vault forever. If someone knows how to stronghold FX and get that seance footage, it would be awesome. But I don't know, it was just a beautiful spirit in the house. And yeah, the people that work for the foundation, like, so cool, like trans kids, white kids, black people, old, young, just like everybody was just there. And it felt really like a total freak scene of people who were there just for like this taboo and this kind of, I don't know, this kind of like legacy. I was kind of taken back by how different it was than what I expected. So
I was wondering, Durk, was that because you and Tom started the foundation together, and was it from the very beginning was the idea to have residents, and did that start at the very beginning, or was that something you sort of started when you took over?
It started later.
Okay.
But he and I, what he did while he was alive, he had salons. And so other artists would come to the house and they would actually share their own work and talk about their method. And so he was instrumental in that. Yes.
So that sort of community.
Yes, he was very much
Yeah.
into, he really elevated other artists to the same level as himself, and really enjoyed that and shared in their whatever their method, just in friendship.
Right.
So.
And I guess that's, also maybe a good place to mention that the sort of egalitarian spirit, in a way, of everything he did, and the fact that, you know more about this than I do, but that he was actually receiving correspondence, from people who were sort of giving suggestions about the work, and he would actually incorporate those suggestions, or at least respond, and so there was always this active dialogue around his art, and almost like, in a way, a sort of collective form of authorship in a certain sense.
He never wanted to take
lovely.
responsibility for like the creation of the leather culture. He said it was absolutely something that was a give and take, and ideas and shared things that produced the whole his own manifestation of how that was expressed. And so he was an equal opportunist that way. I mean, he took advantage of everything, but also he was right. He never saw himself higher. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's. I remember during our Zoom prep call moment, there was a sort of strand that we went on about drawing as collaboration, and how Tom's work was, in a way, drawing to bring people in, drawing for people to respond. There's also an incredible movement to his work. You can see the bodies just feel like they're in motion. I mean, it's very, very much the skill set there. And some of my favorite works are where you can see the sort of ripples of a whip or something, making an impact. It's not even impacting the body, but there's this sort of, motion to it. So I guess there's like a 2-part thought question here. One, like the sort of movement in the works and the kind of collaboration amongst bodies, but also on top of that, just a very process-oriented, or not maybe process-oriented, but how Tom kind of opened the collaboration or feedback, really, from his fans. It was my understanding that they would write and kind of give, suggestions, right, about how the works could go, or how they could be altered, or how they could be, brought into the world. So I'm just curious to hear, Durk, Nayland, Claire, maybe talk a little bit about one part movement and then the other part sort of collaboration.
Well, one thing I could say is I really urge everybody to take a look at the drawings that are on this back wall here. My favorite drawings of Tom's are the ones that you would think of as kind of unfinished. In part because it's like, oh, thank God a human did this. You see like the places where he hasn't quite decided on an outline yet, and where where you can really see his hand moving back and forth, and there will often be moments of just incredible intimacy and tenderness of touch in a certain section, in the drawings, and it's really interesting to see that kind of contrasted with the sketchier parts of it. And so just remembering that, like, to make a drawing is to touch something over and over and over again, and that is something that it carries its own sort of sensual pleasure. But one of the things in the article that sort of contrasted him with Paul Cadmus, who irks me, and it irked me then and still irks me, in part because it's too self-serious, and it believes its own sort of classicism in a way, and then feels like very stolid. I'm sure Cadmus is like a really nice guy, but in terms of like when I contrast his work with Tom's, there's a kind of life and humor in Tom's drawings that I think are not there in Cadmus's. It's like I feel like Cadmus is watching people watch him in a way. He knows that the destination of the work is actually the gallery wall, if everything goes well. Whereas Tom's thing...
Tom said it, my motives are lower than art.
Yeah. That Tom, the sort of famous anecdote is he would draw until he lost his heart-on, and if he lost his heart-on, he knew that it wasn't a great drawing, and that he would draw, he drew to keep himself hard, and all of this other stuff that we're talking about here, like all this impact on community and everything else. I'm gonna be a little preacher here. Shows like each one of us in this room right now has the power to change our world through our perversions. Like, if there's nothing else that you do from today, and Vince, I know that you have some. We'll call you out. But it's like that's what we're here to do, is to think of all the people who would welcome seeing the stuff that gets you wet or gets you hard, making that as a way of being in the world, I think is like the big lesson from this.
The thing that you said, Claire, about fantasy is such an element. It's a big part of the whole drawing process, and that also when the viewer would look at those drawings, and especially the sketches, they got to imagine what it would go on next, right. And they would imagine the next frame, and so he was evoking that, yeah. And go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think that explains why the comic book is a sort of perfect format for him, because that idea of that sense that this is not the final thing, right? That there's always another possibility. I mean, that's what's so wonderful about these. That just when you think it's like there's no other position that could possibly be like achieved, there's some other position, So there's always this sense that there's more, that there's possibility, that this is not the final resolved incarnation of these two people or these three people or these however many people, but that it can always be changed, and that idea of narrative and seriality that's part of the comic book format or the zine format, but it's also part of just even every individual drawing. There's that, which I think gets to what you were talking about movement. Mm-hmm. There's that sense that this is not still. This is not that this could take off in so many different directions, and in that notion is the idea of freedom, right, and
yes.
possibility.
So in regards to sexuality, in that he became sort of a pathway for other artists to be able to open up and express sexuality, which was being frowned upon And if you did include sexuality, museums were not interested in acquiring it. Galleries were embarrassed to show it. And so he didn't care. He went forward and stayed to his course and really tried to reflect what was happening out in culture and in his contemporary society. Yeah.
We have about 15 minutes left. Before we kind of transition, are there, to audience questions, are there any sort of final thoughts or anything we did not mention about Tom's work that feels important for us to take away tonight? I mean, one of the things that I'm also always struck by that Durk brought up just in these works in particular is that they're usually happening outside and in nature, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a sweetness to it and not being afraid of hiding, right? Mm-hmm. It's very outward, it's very in the world. And I think like with these two series in particular, Greasy Rider and Highway Patrol, it's just an interesting thing to sort of think about is how kind of outward it is. And how that, and to me, gets to sort of the crux of Tom is just putting himself out there and bringing other people in to look. So I'm just kind of curious if there's any last thought you have on what we're looking at and anything from these works to the preparatory sketches to the collages behind us.
I just want to say something in regards to queer culture and at the time when these works were done is that it was very much in vogue to actually do jailhouse scenes and cops, raping and forcing, and then also, cops being like pinups and used to evoke. So uniforms were very much in fashion, and there were uniform clubs creating, and motorcycle clubs and leather bars, and all of that was being expressed, and the unknown mystery of who you might go home with and what you might get into. And so people were fantasizing a lot and using, because the internet didn't exist. Yeah. And so it's a little bit touchy now because the thing is that those things are not part of the movement that is being presented now. It's part of our historical past, but it's also, it's more narrow now, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, I remember staying in his room, and they actually have drawings from like when he's like 7 and 8, and they're all cops and robbers. So it's like it wasn't like, you know what I'm saying? It was like there's a.
Killed the robbers killed his parents.
Oh shit! Like that's lit.
Wait,
Read that part.
In his drawing.
Oh, in his drawing.
Well, like I always say, it's all there in the work. It's the rich tapestry. I'm just thinking back to, we had a conversation before this, and we were asking about how these particular drawings ended up here. And you were talking about they were from a collection that had sort of been in hiding, for any amount of time. And I think the other thing that it's very easy for us to forget is how tenuous the chain of circumstances is that allows us to actually still be able to see these things. And I think continually about how many other artists there were who drew stuff like this, and then their family found it and threw it out and burned it, right? Or that they hid it in a wall in some little town in Europe and put a dresser in front of it and nobody ever moved the dresser. How much there is still for us to discover, and how it only takes a person to make the gesture of putting that thing forward, of asserting the value of it. And so I'm big on exhortation. So I think, that's another thing for us to think about. It's like, this stuff doesn't survive unless we help it survive,
Yeah.
And that's what the Drawing Center is about,
And
that's what the foundation
That's
is
what you're
about.
yeah. And all the people around, I mean, also it's just a story of in this case, all the people around Tom, who supported Tom, who helped him, like yourself, and it was a whole, network, it was a whole community that allowed this work to come to where it is. So it's a beautiful story of generosity in that sense.
So we have an exhibition that's in Europe, sitting in warehouse right now, but it was in Paris and Venice, and it's called All Together. And it's 80 different artists that are in our permanent collection, which is just a small sampling of what we have. And but it's a family of artists, and they're expressing what they feel is their sexuality. And so it's really quite, and that's the whole thing about queer culture, is that we are a family, and we have all these different kinds of expressions.
No questions.
So we're going to take this moment now.
Oh, really? Okay, good to know.
Enormous disdain for Tom. He thought it was vulgar, and his creations were awesome. just to put a punctuation on what you were saying.
Also, actually, Paul Cadmus was asked to be in the Daddy and the Muscle Academy, and he said no. He said, I'm an artist, and he's a pornographist.
Yeah, hey, fuck that guy.
All right. On that note, does anyone have any questions? We have about 10 minutes? Not even. 6 minutes? We have 6 minutes.
That sounds like 2 questions.
That sounds like maybe 2 questions. If not, everyone's staying, right? We'll have an opening right after this, and we can chat then. But any questions in the audience? Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'm an artist.
Stand up, please.
I'm an artist. I have a show. I did a body of work on the story of O, the erotic S&M novel,
Yeah.
just at the beginning of Me Too, which was censored, and it shocked me. I made drawings. And luckily, I found a new place to show the work, and it was also a book. But I was curious how Tom dealt with censorship. And I thought I was flattered. I thought it was a wonderful thing that drawing could still incite such upset.
Well, the great thing about the Velvet Underground is that his work could be passed around, and it got passed around through the Velvet Underground. And so that was, it was a choice. Either because it couldn't go above, and because no one, and it's pretty amazing. Like, we did a coffee table book in 1988, and I had a terrible time finding printer. I had to go to the adult industry for a printer, and then I couldn't find a bindery for it. And I went through all the binderies in Southern California, and I finally called one that was in the Yellow Pages, and he was a Hasidic Jew who actually only did the Torah. And I said to him, can I bring you the signatures so you can at least see? And he said, sure. And so I took them out to him, and he said, well, I don't have any problem with it at all, but I'm only here with my daughter, my teenage daughter, and she can't be exposed to it. So we said, we'll give you our staff. So 2 of our staff were his full-time workers for printing 40,000 books. And yes.
One more question. So.
What was Tom's feeling toward religion? Because religion put this down and damper on
He didn't. What he did is he actually just showed life and nature. Finns are pretty amazing because they are so connected to nature. If they're kept in the city very long, they get squeamish and they need to go and run in the forest naked by themselves.
Thank you, everyone.
I just want to quickly plug one other thing about legacy, which is that if you are not already aware, you should be aware of an organization called Visual AIDS. It is an archive and resource that supports the work of artists living with HIV/AIDS, and also preserves the work of artists who have passed from that. When we're talking about this work about building community and mutual support, it's an incredible resource. It's something that doing some work with them is something that is fun to do and can help you expand this idea of supporting mutual folks. So.
I just want to add to that. We are also a nonprofit. We're based in LA, but we depend on membership, and so I really invite all of you to go and look at our website and to consider being a donor or a member of the foundation. And we have to actually take care of our queer culture. It will not take care of itself. And so whether it's Visual AIDS or Tom of Finland Foundation, it's really about nurturing it and knowing that it belongs to you. And as long as you will care for it, it will exist. And if you don't, it will disappear.
And join the Drawing Center.
Yeah. Thank you all.